geometric blocks of the barracks. Inside the base recreation room, the atmosphere was considerably more relaxed. It was a Sunday, a rare day of quiet reprieve from the relentless drilling, marching, and physical exertion that defined the lives of the recruits. Private First Class Gomer-Pyle was humming a soft, familiar melody from his hometown. His mop slid rhythmically across the linoleum floor of the recreation room, a task he had taken upon himself simply because he liked things to be tidy. His uniform was perfectly pressed. His boots gleamed with a fresh layer of polish, and his face wore that permanent, unmistakable expression of pure, unadulterated earnestness. Gomer did not mind the extra work. In fact, he found a certain peaceful rhythm in the repetitive motion of the mop. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door of the recreation room swung open, and a fellow Marine leaned in, shielding his eyes from the glare of the outdoor sun. "Hey, Pyle," the Marine called out, his voice echoing slightly in the large, mostly empty hall. "You got a visitor over in the main reception area." Gomer stopped his mopping, leaning on the long wooden handle. He blinked his large, innocent eyes, a wave of genuine surprise washing over his face. "A visitor? To see me?" "Yeah," the Marine replied, a slight, amused smirk playing on his lips. "But do not get too excited about it, buddy. She is definitely the motherly type." Gomer scratched the side of his head, his brow furrowing in deep, gentle concentration. "The motherly type," he muttered to himself, his southern drawl wrapping around the syllables like molasses. "I wonder who in the world that could be." He carefully leaned his mop against the wall, smoothed the wrinkles from his uniform shirt, and began to walk toward the reception area. His mind raced with possibilities, though the list of people who might travel all this way to see him was remarkably short. As he rounded the corner into the sunlit reception lounge, his eyes fell upon a familiar, comforting figure, sitting gracefully on a hard wooden bench, wearing a lovely floral dress and a perfectly sensible hat, was none other than Aunt Bee. She was the very embodiment of home, carrying with her the invisible, comforting aura of freshly baked pies, warm summer evenings on the porch, and the quiet, friendly streets of Mayberry, North Carolina. Gomer's face lit up like a sunrise. He broke into a wide, beaming smile and hurried across the room. "Aunt Bee!" he exclaimed, his voice trembling with sheer joy. Aunt Bee looked up, her eyes widening in absolute astonishment as she took in the sight of the man standing before her. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and reached out her hands. "Gomer, well, I declare, Gomer, for land's sakes, just look at you." She circled him slowly, her eyes tracing the sharp lines of his pressed uniform, the broadness of his shoulders, and the confident, upright posture that the United States Marine Corps had drilled into him. "Why, I would not even know you if I saw you on the street right now," Aunt Bee said, her voice thick with affectionate disbelief. "It is true, it is true," Gomer chuckled, his cheeks flushing a deep, bashful red. "You are an entirely different person," she continued, patting his sturdy arm. "When you left Mayberry, you were a frail, scrawny little thing. But just look at you now. Gomer-Pyle, you're actually handsome." Gomer looked down at his boots, kicking at the floor playfully. "I am still just Gomer, am I not?" "Yes, you certainly are," Aunt Bee smiled warmly, her eyes twinkling with pride. "Well, you look mighty good yourself, Aunt Bee," Gomer replied, taking her hands in his. "This is just wonderful, just plain wonderful. But what in the world are you doing all the way out?" "Here." Aunt Bee settled back onto the bench, gesturing for Gomer to sit beside her. "Well, I am on my way to Fresno. You remember my little niece, Judy May Olander, do you not?" Gomer nodded enthusiastically. "I certainly do." "Well, she is getting married," Aunt Bee announced, her voice bubbling with excitement. "You do not say," Gomer replied, his eyes wide with shared happiness. "Yes, and she made a very good catch, too," Aunt Bee confided, leaning in slightly as if sharing a delightful secret. "The young fellow is a butcher down at the supermarket. You know the kind of money they make in that business. Of course. He is supposed to be a lovely, sweet person, too. That is the most important part. Well, was not that just nice? Gomer sighed happily, genuinely thrilled for people he barely knew, simply because Amby was thrilled. Of course, Amby continued, adjusting her handbag on her lap. At first, I was not going to go all that way, but Andy just insisted. He said I desperately needed a vacation from my daily household chores. Gomer nodded understandingly. He is a good man, Andy is. So I thought to myself I would make it a real vacation, and I would stop and come and see you, too, on my way. Well, I am sure glad you did. Gomer beamed. This is just wonderful. But tell me, how is everybody back in Mayberry? How is Andy? And little Opie and the whole gang? Oh, everyone is just fine, Gomer, Amby said, patting her purse. And I have got a whole lot of pictures to show you. Now, Gomer, would you happen to have a little time today? I thought maybe we could go into town. We could have a nice dinner, and then have a long, lovely talk about everything under the sun. Gomer's smile faltered just a fraction, a look of profound regret washing over his gentle features. He looked down at his polished boots, wishing more than anything that he could oblige the sweet woman sitting beside him. Well, I sure would like to, Aunt B, Gomer said softly, his voice heavy with genuine sorrow. But I am afraid I just cannot. You see, all the other fellows are out on pass today, and I have got the barracks duty. Aunt B looked at him, her practical mind immediately working on a solution to this minor obstacle. Well, maybe I could go over there with you. We can talk while you do your barracks duties. That way, we do not waste a single minute. Gomer scratched his chin, pondering the suggestion. The rules of the base were strict, but his heart was so full of joy at seeing a friendly face from home that his usual rigorous adherence to regulations softened just a bit. Well, he murmured thoughtfully, I do not suppose there would be any real harm in it. Today is Sunday, after all, and there will not be anybody else there to bother us. Yeah, I guess you could, Gomer concluded, his smile returning brightly. Good, good, Amby said, standing up briskly and smoothing her dress. She linked her arm through his as they began to walk out of the reception area and toward the living quarters. Oh, Gomer, I just cannot get over how incredibly handsome you are in that uniform. The walk to the barracks was filled with more chatter about the folks back home. The Californian breeze rustled the leaves of the eucalyptus trees as they strolled down the pristine asphalt paths. When they finally reached the wooden structure that housed Gomer and his platoon, Gomer opened a heavy door and proudly ushered Ampy inside. The barracks were a marvel of austere military efficiency. 2 long rows of metal bunk beds stretched from one end of the long room to the other, perfectly aligned. At the foot of each bed sat a drab, olive-green locker. The floor was bare linoleum polished to a dull shine, and the large windows let in the bright afternoon light, illuminating the microscopic particles of dust dancing in the air. Amby stopped just inside the doorway, her eyes scanning the vast, empty room. There was not a single rug, not a solitary painting, and certainly not a ruffle or a piece of lace in sight. It was purely functional, and to a woman who prided herself on making a house a home, it looked incredibly desolate. Well, so this is where you live, is it? She asked, her voice carrying a hint of polite dismay. Yes, ma'am, Gomer answered proudly, leading her down the center aisle. And this right here is my bunk, and right next to it, this here is my locker. Ampy stared at the narrow mattress, the tightly pulled wool blanket, and the cold metal locker. Is that all the space you have in this whole big place? She asked, genuinely shocked. Gomer, I thought surely you would have a room of your own by now. Gomer chuckled softly, shaking his head. Oh, no, ma'am, you've got to be a whole lot higher up in the ranks than me to get something like that. Ampy shook her head slowly. Well, there is not much privacy at all, is there? No, ma'am, Gomer agreed cheerfully, entirely unbothered by the fact. But it is awfully friendly. I will admit, it was a little hard for me to get used to it at first, sharing a bedroom with so many other fellows. But now, well, I just do not think I could ever sleep in a room by myself anymore. It would feel too lonely and be offered